Welcome to Masterpiece. The Haunted Screen is a film essay by critic Peter Buchka, who was film editor of Süddeutsche Zeitung for 25 years. The documentary examines the rise of expressionism in the German silent films of the 1920s and their relation to the psyche of their audiences at the time. Post-World War II and fearful of an unsettled existence, these films invented strange characters who crossed the boundaries of social limitations, leading to destruction and chaos. World domination by madmen was a recurring theme. The film includes clips from such classics as Metropolis, Faust, Dr. Mabuse, Nibelungen and Murnau's Nosferatu, and it'll be followed tonight by Werner Herzog's movie version of Nosferatu. See you at the end.
The gates of darkness are thrown open and the shadow spirits race across the globe. The four horsemen of the apocalypse gallop across Germany. They've been awakened by the dead of the First World War, the victims of hybrid superpower politics who now call those responsible to account. But Germany is a nation of final things. It is not the worldly powers to whom one turns for answers, but the divine. Perhaps they can reveal what caused the devastation of this land and its souls. Fritz Lang initially used expressionistic metaphors to conjure the image of blind fate, the kind beyond all human influence and which comes over them like a nameless catastrophe. It's this flight from all political and social reality that makes the German films of the 20s so uniquely powerful, the unconditional willingness to express reality in excessively mythical and poetic images, and to find metaphors and symbols which are representative of time itself and yet timeless. When the shadow of disaster looms, the hour of the scholar has come. In Paul Wegener's Golem film, it is the medieval Rabbi Loew who sees the downfall of his Prague congregation in the constellation of the stars. It is he who must find a way of preventing catastrophe. Modern man, having just put the horror of World War behind him, hopes to escape in the future unscathed by turning his back on all time, to the point of abstinence. But this can no more prevent calamity than anything else, as demonstrated by Murnau, the mischievous psychologist, in Castle Vogelot. Doesn't seem to work without the help of metaphors. And so, in a virtual explosion of creativity, German film invented the most strange and peculiar figures, who would use supernatural abilities and methods to help basic human nature find its way through the turmoil of time. Somnambulists and crazed psychiatrists, artificial humans and quack healers, fairy tale figures and invincible heroes, and even the devil. Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau even went back to the old folk tale of Dr. Faustus, as did Thomas Mann following the Second World War, in order to explain what was so agonizingly inexplicable. His Faust, filmed in 1925, is the poetic sum of post-World War I German film, in the same way that Fritz Lang's Nibelungen was the monumental precursor to the Third Reich. Of course, the clever scholar is no better at things than the famed sorcerer's apprentice, who soon finds he cannot control the spirits he has conjured. Even more so, since the idea of an artificial human, a romantic notion which pictured a perfected being more powerful and graceful than a natural human could ever be, was irreparably broken following the material battles of the First World War. Even Rabbi Lowe's golem, which was meant to protect the congregation from evil, and actually succeeds at first, ends up turning into the evil force itself. This is already evident in the first steps taken by the clump of earth. This idea is further developed in complexity and modernized by Fritz Lang in Metropolis. The false Maria created by the brilliant inventor Rotwang as a substitute for his lost love is used by the ruler of Metropolis, Johann Fredersen, as a seductive double for the real Maria. While Rotwang still passionately believes he has achieved his ideals, the more power-oriented Fredersen is already figuring out how to manipulate the masses so as to prevent the realization of just the same ideals. The devil works in even more radical ways. In the same way the Nazis would publicly burn entire libraries of learning and study just a few years later, Mephisto burns books so that they can no longer spread their supposed subversive influence. In return, he gives back the aging Faust his youth, which in this case means the unscrupulous hunger for life, which the peaceful scholar had long since put behind him. Gradually, each dream is transformed into a nightmare. The newly married estate agent Hutter, who is so eager to sell Count Orlok a home in his own city in order to make some money, soon discovers where his greed has led him. Instead of securing his marriage with some extra money, Hutter has put his marriage in danger. He finds out in the most literal way possible the meaning of having a skeleton in the closet as applied to dubious transactions, by having a vampire, an undead being, in the basement as Nosferatu. Horror and flight are of no use to Hutter. Nosferatu has already captured a ship and is on his way to Wismar, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. The Count, who has seen a picture of Hutter's wife, is obsessed by the idea of claiming her for his own, and is even more determined to take up residence in Wismar. At some point, each finds himself in the trap set by the other. The only course of action is to carry out the contract signed in blood or sealed with a handshake. The greedy hunger for life always has its price, and the devil can lower the curtain on the human comedy with a satisfied chuckle. German post-war film displayed a fascination with an abrupt, direct view of the depths of human despair, into the inconceivable, the occult, the mysterious. It consciously turned its back on middle-class norms, thus holding up a mirror to this supposed normality. Unintentionally, and in a rather lurid manner, it demonstrated its proximity to psychoanalysis, which was invented the same year as film itself, and as the automobile. Outer movement and inner emotion are the elements these three so different achievements have in common. In Robert Wiene's The Hands of Orlach, a famous concert pianist believes that his hands, which were crushed in an accident, have been replaced by an executed murderer's hands. He convinces himself that he will commit murder himself, and is deathly afraid that his own life will be his first victim. It is the ruined family that is the real source of his destructive fantasies. G.W. Pabst uses a bolder, simpler style in Soul Secrets, which is described as a psychoanalytical film. A childless man suddenly finds he is unable to look at knives without having the uncontrollable impulse of turning them on his wife. Shortly after the war, Ernst Lubitsch ventured for the first time into the realm of exotic melodrama with The Eyes of the Mummy Ma. Art's ambiguity is lavishly portrayed here as the clash of cultures and states of mind. Egyptian temple dancer Ma, who has married a painter named Wendland, is shocked when she discovers that temple priest Radu has followed her to Germany. She is considered a traitor and must be brought home. Unable to flee her past, she suffers horrific fantasies and hallucinations, which come true all too soon. Murnau's Nosferatu is a virtuoso example of tightly woven psychic connections displayed on a cinematic level. Back home in Wismar, Ellen sleepwalks her way to the knowledge that her husband Hunter is in danger in faraway Transylvania. Less explicit is how and why she intends to help him, whether she has a death wish and wants to sacrifice herself, or whether she wants to be seduced by the vampire is never entirely clear. What is remarkable about this odd ménage à trois is their close psychic relationship, which exposes human despair in an almost telepathic manner. Fritz Lang took a decisive step from individual to mass psychology in Metropolis. Although Lang himself said he was not very politically aware at the time, this is clearly a political act. Johann Fredesen first tests the false Maria's seductive powers in his son's club before turning her on the workers to incite revolution. Only Fredesen's son, who can't tell the difference between the real and the false, suspects betrayal, but out of love. The ruler's other sons simply abandon themselves to her seductions. Dr. Mabuse is the perfection of the man who manipulates and seduces the masses. One of his many roles is that of the fashionable psychologist, and it is in this figure that he demonstrates how it's possible to seduce an entire society by sheer force of will, via suggestion. In retrospect, this early anticipation of Hitler's methods is undeniable. Louis XV is another figure who attempts to create a reality which is virtually impossible in this realm. When at court he seduces his mistress, Madame du Barry, in Lubitsch's film of the same name, he decides to make the little seamstress the most powerful woman in France. This is set in a time of feudal privilege and intrigue, but there is also a clear foreshadowing of revolution in the air, revolution that never got very far in Germany itself. Director Dmitry Bukovetsky focused on the gullibility of the masses in a young democracy. He openly mocks their fickleness and more or less makes the demand for a strong hand to lead them. And so in the political confusion of the post-war period, German post-war film begins to disavow its own achievements, the liberation from human weakness through its staged emotional revelation. Dr. Mabuse has sarcastically turned his role-playing game into a card game here. He uses his various roles to enter various social classes and brings chaos into society as a whole. That he has chosen to dress as a business tycoon has only one goal, as does all his role-playing, the undermining of the status quo. Nosferatu, Caligari, and Mabuse are all cut from the same cloth in that they have only contempt for the individual, degrading everyone to a submissive tool of their plans. Mabuse is able to gain world dominion, something he himself didn't believe in at first, due to the ease of his own success. Fritz Lang created the unlikely character of an omnipotent man, someone who always knows just where to make money in business as well as in the criminal world. It comes as no surprise that the beggar loitering around the front door of Mabuse's house is a middleman to the underworld. In Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau's film A Way to the Night, optometrist Egil Börne celebrates his fiancée's birthday with her in a variety theater. The middle-class group sees this as a chance to step out of ordinary life for a night. But those who dare enter the underworld are then pursued by their most secret fears. The strange longings and nightmares of the middle class are unexpectedly fulfilled and cannot be shaken. The abyss suddenly opens its jaws. In this case, the reason Egil decides to remain in a world completely new to him is the dancer Lily. Lily pretends to have an accident. At first, the optometrist remains reserved, partially because this isn't his specialty. But he's already smitten. He'll dissolve his engagement, even though he's not yet aware of this. For her part, Lily is already fully aware that this is her chance to sneak into the middle class. This is the same phenomenon we saw with Dr. Mabuse. The societal limitations no longer have any meaning. The destruction of old rules is a precursor to the collapse of the government, even if each individual remains ignorant of this fact. In his 1925 film Variety, E.A. Dupont took the Shadow World complex and turned it into a drama of jealousy, the story of a love triangle. But this is only on the surface. He also used the typical tool of disguise, the mask. It is no longer surprising when the nightmare becomes reality. It isn't coincidental that the epaulettes are adorned with the symbol of death. These are people who know perfectly well what they're doing. They are toying with death and are always aware of its presence. Everyone is out for thrills of one kind or another. It all depends on what risks each is willing to take. Some are actors in this game while others remain spectators. The result is a society which is gradually undermined, which lacks a solid foundation. There is no longer any sure footing in any area of life. With Dr. Mabuse, Fritz Lang demonstrates that life is just a game without rules. In his variation on Tartuffe, Murnau shows the inner consequences of this societal change: hypocrisy, fraud, and self-deception. The wealthy Mr. Orgon refuses to believe that his new friend, the hypocrite Tartuffe, simply wants to take everything he has, to rob him of his wealth and the faithfulness of his wife and his daughter. This is perhaps the most enigmatic and complex scene in all of German post-war cinema. It deals with the intimate relationship between desire and rejection, and the lack of resolution between the two. It isn't clear whether Ellen Hutter is fearfully awaiting Nosferatu's arrival, or whether she is pressing herself on him as a willing victim. It is desire, a very obscure, dark desire which cannot necessarily be explained. Even though she makes a show of sending her husband to the doctor, she does it just at the moment the vampire enters the house. The boundaries between the real world and the dream world become blurred. Many films contain a deep fear of eros, and an even deeper fear of leading an unsettled way of life, of the restless and the dissolute. Many people see all too clearly that a similar fate awaits them because the era of societal order has passed. The blossoming of expressionism in German film was also a typology of Germans and that which is German. A constant vacillation between extremes, a certain inability to enjoy life, a doggedness in the pursuit of ideas and goals, as well as an unmistakably tragic attitude toward existence in general, and the societal status quo in particular. In contrast to Murnau's metaphysical Faust film, Fritz Lang tried something more lurid in Spies, which he made 2 years later. All the modern technical creations are implemented to create an image of unscrupulousness, omnipresence, and of course, violence. Like Mabuse, Hagi in Spies has the same greedy desire for omnipotence. German urban expressionism interprets the word underworld in a completely modern and literal manner to mean the criminal world, where mad geniuses are the secret rulers who run things like an absolutist state and hone their plans to take over the world. And this reveals one of the deepest paradoxes. He who desires to be known to all must remain in the underworld. He can only live out his limitless egotism by remaining unknown. Unlike the chaotic genius of Mabuse, Hagi has established his empire based on strict rationalism. He's interested in only one thing: power. Power without content, with no ulterior motives. Hagi is more of a technocrat, a crippled banker who works from his desk and uses all modern methods of communication. There is only one goal, and that is to have more, the desire to have it all. Mabuse is more of an evil romanticist, a gambler who hopes that by taking some risks he can win the game. He doesn't deal with middlemen, preferring to use his own psychic abilities to the point of hypnotizing his opponents. The general chaos that ensues gives Mabuse the chance of simply taking the woman he desires rather than winning her affections. In contrast to Lang, Murnau always concentrated on the fate of individuals. In The Last Laugh, he grandly pushes mankind through a revolving door and then focuses on a single lonely old man who receives neither attention nor assistance as he moves down the social ladder. From his position as the porter at a luxury hotel, who is ever so proud of his uniform, he falls to the level of a bathroom attendant, the last man in the hierarchy. The individual no longer knows what is happening to him. Social certainties as well as moral values have lost all meaning. Murnau's Phantom is another story set between hallucination and reality. The world is suddenly out of balance, or rather, it is out of alignment. Lawrence, the minor municipal clerk who dreams of being a poet, finds the roofs of his small town falling on his head. In a world of absolute profit, everyone knows that the toll of lives will be heavy. Especially Sonia, Hagi's mistress of many years, who accepts a large gift here with skepticism. She doesn't trust it. She knows that she herself will be the next victim in a large-scale plot. What is manifested in the fantasies of omnipotence shown in expressionist films are deep and very real fears. On one hand, there is the hope for the infamous strong man who will lead his subjects toward a new future. On the other hand, there is an obvious fear of helplessness and exploitation. Fritz Lang loved the monstrosity celebrated by his leading characters. It is their way of expressing power, which in the Nibelungen films runs in the direction of medieval ornament, and in Metropolis becomes a dream of modernism. Since the kings of the underworld know that they will never be able to achieve legal status, they go mad, and it is a very German madness. In his famous book From Caligari to Hitler, Siegfried Kracauer saw in German film the harbinger of the Nazi dictatorship, although the connection is perhaps less unambiguous than it might appear. What is clear is that all these films have a very strong sense of approaching evil. What occurred in German film following the First World War is epochal in scale. It is nothing less than the breakthrough of the unconscious in the narrative form. It was Lotte Eisner who coined the term the haunted screen for this era in film, and it remains the most apt description for this aesthetic phenomenon.
I hope you'll stay tuned now for Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, right after the break with David Stratton. For New Year's Eve tomorrow night, we're showing Offenbach's Opera Buffa, La Pericole, and next Saturday afternoon at 12:30, a documentary about Neapolitan opera buffa. Next Sunday night, we'll be showing another film documentary. Fellini narrates a discovered self-portrait. But before that, I hope you'll join us on the evening of January 1 for the live via satellite annual New Year's Day concert with the Vienna Philharmonic at 9:15. Thanks again for your company. Good night.